it brain dead and asleep. You want us trapped while you all laugh behind the scenes. You want us sick, you think we're dumb. You want us blind and you want us drunk. You want us poor while you get more of everything. But you don't get to tell me what to think and what to do. No, you don't get to tell me what is true. 'Cause you're just liars, cheats and crooks. Change the rules and you burn the books. And so I don't believe a single word you say. You're all liars, fakes and cons. Want you out and we want you gone. So don't believe this time you'll get away. You want us tricked.
I said I would limit it to 1 minute. By the way, I get goosebumps when I listen to music that I love. I don't know if you can see it. And I've been told that they're actually not goosebumps when you get moved by music or, scenes from movies. They're called a frisson, which is sort of a French reference. A frisson is when things like tingle down your skin. And they're not goosebumps, which are typically from when you get cold and, you might get other body appendages that respond to the cold. That is 5 Times August new song. Let me make sure I'm on my good mic here. I am. That's 5 Times August new song. I made sure that I had his authorization to start today's show with a minute of that. And now I kind of want to ask him if I can start every episode with that song. that would be like the countdown timer for every episode. If you don't know who 5 Times August is, I don't know where you've been. I know some of you are going to say, like, I don't want to go support Apple Music. You're not supporting Apple Music when you go download that song and bring it to number 1. You're supporting 5 Times August. The link to the song is in the chat now, and I'm going to give the link to the tweet because the video is amazing. Here's a link to the tweet. So go check that out. Go check it out. And that is all. Good morning, everybody. I am not a person who revels in the misery of others, ever. But I don't revel in the misery of others because what we are witnessing right now is not genuine misery. It's not genuine sadness from people who lost the election. It is hysterical babies throwing hissy fits. And yes, I'm a parent. And I'm not always that, oh, it's okay, son. You don't, I understand you're disappointed that you can't eat candy. No. You quit crying and you quit being a baby and you grow the F up. Oh, someone called you a jerk. Someone called you mean at school. Someone called you fat. What? Oh, I'm sorry. Grow up and get over it. So what we're witnessing right now, it's not misery. It's not true sadness. It's not someone who lost a dog. It's not someone whose squirrel and raccoon were seized by the government and summarily executed. What we are watching are a bunch of snowflake babies whose daddies never told them no, throwing a hissy fit because they didn't win this time. And yes, I am reveling in the meltdown on the internet. Cardi B comes out and says, I'm 1 cigarette away from going crazy. I got 1 cigarette left in me. I was like, you got 1 cigarette left in you. You should talk to Monica Lewinsky. There's room for more, Cardi. Holy hell. We're going to talk about it today because I'm convinced. I know Gad Saad, if you don't know him, the Gadfather, you know him because he's been on the channel a bunch of times and he's awesome. He's not a clinician who can diagnose collective mental illness. But he's a very smart man with an understanding of history and the mental psyche to be able to diagnose collective mental illness. We're going to get there. Gad's in the house. We're going to talk about his upcoming book called Suicidal Empathy, or has something to do with suicidal empathy. But before we get into that, guys, I tweeted out our sponsors for the I mean, they're so good. Look, let me say a brief word from our sponsors who are, I am proud to have these as sponsors, and they proudly sponsor content like mine and others. And this is a Rumble partner, so you can support the alternative economy, the parallel economy, instead of giving your money to companies that think you're too stupid to know how to vote for your own interests. This is the 1775 coffee, but I see this. Now, I admit I have a dirty sense of humor, and I couldn't, for a second, I couldn't figure out what I was looking at on the left, because I looked at the image before reading the text on the top where it says, our beans are moldy and their beans are moldy and ours stand boldly. That's Kamala Harris. That's Donald Trump. And this is 1775 coffee, people. Did you know that most creamers aren't even made with real cream or dairy? That's right. Your morning coffee is a chemical cocktail of oils, sugars, and thickeners that would make a lab rat nervous, but not 1775's coffee protein creamer. 10 grams of muscle-building whey protein, 0 sugar, 0 fat, and under 50 calories, non-GMO, and packed with smooth vanilla flavor that actually tastes like victory. It's an American fuel for those who want to crush their day, not just survive it. Fasting, building muscle, or just getting ready to battle whatever the globalists throw your way. 1775's creamer is your secret weapon. Pair it with the unapologetically bold single origin coffee, and you're not just starting your day, you're launching a full-scale assault on mediocrity. The combo is fantastic. Go to the website. It's pure, unadulterated American fuel for those who refuse to compromise. It is 1775. I want to not make a mistake on it. 1775coffee.com/Viva, and you'll get 15% off with that promo code. And that is one company of a sponsor building a parallel economy. And the second and last for today's show is 5G free. People, you know what's worse than getting scammed online, getting your data stolen while you're just walking down the street? In 2024, hackers with portable skimmers can swipe your credit card information from 3 feet away without ever touching your wallet. They don't need a wiretap like they got against Donald Trump in 2016 during their peaceful transition of power. No, they've got the tech to grab your data while you're waiting for your morning cup of hopefully 1775 coffee wherever it's served. That's why 5G Free created an RFID blocking wallet. Think of it as armor for your credit cards. They aren't just regular wallets. They block scanners that thieve, scam, and steal all of your info just by gliding by you on the street. It's like your pocket is in a digital shield, stopping skimmers, preventing fraud, and keeping your hard-earned money safe. Go to 5gfree.com. Promo code VIVA gets you 15% off. Secure your data. 5gfree.com. Promo VIVA. And it's in the description, as is the newest title of the Dr. Gad Saad, who's sitting there. If you saw what I see right now, what you're going to see, I'm looking at a statue of a Greek hero chiseled out of rock. Gad, I'm bringing you in.
Oh my! I like that chiseled Greek god. I love it.
I look bigger than you on screen, but you're a good 6 inches taller than me, and more impressive than me in real life. Gad, how goes the battle?
In the upper 6 inches, or where it really counts in the pants 6 inches? Which one were you referring to?
Probably both. All that I know is that mine worked well enough for 3 kids, and that's all I needed in life.
How you doing, Viva? So good to see you.
The same, Gad. You're stuck behind the maple gulag up in Canada, where the shit is hitting the fan these days.
Yes. Well, I don't know if you saw. I actually prepared it for you. I just put out a tweet of my fear, the faux fear that all of my colleagues are exhibiting. So could I share with you? Can I read out my tweet?
No, please. Do you see? Go to the private chat, and then you can send me the link. But I'll just go to you. I'll go to you right now and get it.
You're asking me to multitask. It's too much for me.
I'll get it. Is this the let me see here.
It's very early in my feed, like probably about half an hour ago. 12:26. So
12:26.
It's called my own Donald Trump orgiastic Dear Diary entry of faux fear. You ready?
Yeah, I got it. I'll bring it up when you read it, and I'll bring it up in 2 seconds.
Now, I was going to splash fake tears on me because I'm so scared. So I'm going to read it for your fans. Here we go. Okay, ready? Today I stand before you as a fearful Jew of color. Now that Trump has won, I realize that my days as a free man are numbered. Also, my wife, who self-identifies as a man, is fearful that he will be sent to a trans gulag. Because my biological female wife is a man, this implies that we are in a same-sex gay marriage. I know that Trump is going to commit a genocide on gay people, so I worry that if we were to ever go to the US, we will be rounded up into extermination camps. Finally, as a behavioral scientist and professor of 30 plus years, I know that Trump is anti-science. Hence, I'm likely going to be fired from my academic job because he plans on eradicating science. I'm looking at the possibility of starting a falafel food truck with my friend Ahmed, but I worry that Trump is going to round up all Muslims. Finally, my husband, meaning my biological female wife who identifies as a man, might wish to have unlimited abortions, and I fear that he won't be able to do that anymore. Please help me. I'm so scared. And then I put in brackets, it's really surprising that Trump won on Tuesday. Do you buy my story of faux fear? Do you feel my fear?
Well, the funny thing is, if I didn't know you, I would not necessarily be 1,000% certain that that is satire and parody. It's. I mean, let's start from ground zero here, like the step one. People call mass formation psychosis a conspiracy theory or something that doesn't exist. What are your credentials for those who may not know you?
Well, I have a bachelor's of science in mathematics and computer science. I have an MBA with a thesis in operations research. I have an MS in science in I mean, officially it's in management, but it's in behavioral sciences. And my PhD is in psychology of decision making with one of the leading cognitive psychologists in the world. He just recently retired. I've been a behavioral scientist for 30 plus years. I pioneered the field of evolutionary consumer behavior. So I know one or two things about human behavior.
So let's start with the number one thing. Mass formation psychosis, which we're told doesn't exist, is a conspiracy theory. Oddly enough, the authorities that fact checkers use to debunk it are behavioral or they're so-called behavioral group psychologists, which to me, group behavior is mass formation psychosis by another name. Your professional opinion, Doc. Does it exist or does it not exist, and what is it in reality?
It does, and it's hardly the first time that the manifestation of this kind of unhinged collective irrationality has taken place, right? What makes it unique? So, for example, oftentimes, so to your question, and I'll just add to it, many times people ask me, so what you refer to in your book as parasitic idea pathogens, is this a novel thing? So to your question, is mass psychosis something new? It's not new, but the specific parasitic ideas are new. So so to draw an analogy, it's not as though viruses didn't exist prior to COVID, but COVID was a new virus, right? So viruses have always existed, but there's now a new manifestation. In 1918, there was the Spanish flu, another virus, okay? So the problem arises today that over the past 50 to 100 years, there is a set of dreadful ideas, all of which were spawned on university campuses. And it took a while to proliferate outside of the ivory tower. And what we're seeing now, in part, which you call mass psychosis, I call, parasitic idea pathogens, is the result of that indoctrination that has been slowly taking place for 50 to 100 years. The reason why I say 50 to 100, because depending on the parasitic idea, you can put a stamp of it's about 100 years ago. So say, for example, cultural relativism, the idea that all cultures are equal and who are we to judge the values of another culture and so on. That came from Franz Boas, a Columbia University professor, about 100 years ago. On the other hand, postmodernism is a movement that started about 50 years ago or so. So between 50 and 100 years is when all the lunacy really started.
And now, I can only think of like two modern eras. You think of Nazi Germany is the classic paradigm of when society descends into madness. You can think of Mao's revolution or Stalinism in general. And some people will say, well, that's not a form of mass group hysteria, or that's more living under tyranny and everyone's too scared to do whatever. But there were true believers in all of those, in as much as we're seeing true believers today. I guess so. Nothing new. We're tapping into something of human condition, of I would call the weak spirits, the weak minds.
Yeah, exactly. So, and to take your example of, say, the Soviet Union, and I referenced this in the parasitic mind, Lysenkoism, okay, was a scientific theory named after Lysenko, who was the head of science under Stalin. They believed that the laws of heredity, the laws of genetics, were not consistent with Marxist philosophy. And therefore, they purported that there is another, more veridical genetic theory, which then became known as Lysenkoism. Without getting into the technical weeds, it is based on something, an evolutionary theory called Lamarckism, which is a theory of acquired traits, which is not how evolutionary mechanisms operate, at least not when it comes to, say, crossing crops when you're developing an agricultural program. But they thought that that theory was more in line with their Marxist philosophies. So they built their food programs and their agricultural programs in line with this false scientific theory, which then led to the death by starvation of 20 to 30 million people. The reason why I tell that story is because it demonstrates that it's not only, the uneducated that are parasitized by these weak minds, as you said. To the contrary, it's usually the intellectuals who come up with those dreadful ideas, and then because of their imprimatur as experts, they can then pass on those theories to all of the imbeciles out there.
It's like Lysenko is kind of amazing, especially when you're talking about farming. It's almost as absurd, but not quite as absurd. Or I guess you've seen Idiocracy, correct?
I know of it. I didn't see it from start to finish.
You absolutely must, because there's a part in it where they're giving Brondo. Plants need electrolytes. It's got electrolytes, so they're feeding plants basically Gatorade, the movie version of Gatorade, and all the plants are dying. And the guy's like, "Why are you giving the plants Gatorade?" And they say, "Well, it's got electrolytes." It's like, "Do you know what electrolytes do?" And he says, and they say they just need water. And he's like, "The water growing out of the toilet? The water you have in the toilet?" And he's like, "Yeah." He's like, "Well, Mr. Smarty Pants, why don't I see plants growing out of the toilet then?" And it's that level of insanity that you have when the science doesn't work. You make up some sort of excuse, political excuse for it. And lo and behold, they had the Dust Bowl in Idiocracy, and they had a famine that killed 20 million people as a result of Lysenkoism. How you're in the thick of Canada, where I see people virtue signaling the election of Trump, not understanding it was a decisive landslide majority vote, popular vote victory, and yet these jackasses think they know better than the people for themselves. What's the mood up in Canada?
Well, it's exactly what you would expect from a super progressive country, which is that this only solidifies our view. I'm speaking now as the progressive Canadian, not as Gad Saad, that our southern neighbors are truly ruled by insane, degenerate, toothless maniacs who sleep with their sisters, right? I mean, what else could explain that Trump would come to? But by the way, I yes, of course, I've got a talent to use hyperbolic humor and satire, but what makes that satire so powerful is that it really is a very accurate description. As you said, when I first read my tweet, and you said I wouldn't be able to know if I didn't know you, if it's real or fake, if you're being satirical or not. The kind of hysteria you see, Viva, it offends me to my core. So and again, this is not some misinformed, quote, low information voter that's espousing those positions. Those are my colleagues, many of whom have all of the titles and accolades that you could hope to have. And by the way,
well, speaking of which, Gad, I mean, I went down your feed here also. I mean, we come across similar stuff, but this is a real thing, by the way, that you retweeted. You said, let's see if I can get this here. "In my entire academic career, I have never incorporated political issues into my pedagogic responsibilities. Check this out. What happens if someone in this person's lab was a fervent supporter of Donald Trump? Academia needs to be purged of this ideological rapture. It is a cancer that I've been warning you about for decades." Read this, or please read The Parasitic Mind, and make sure you get Suicidal Empathy when it comes out for pre-ordering. I will. But I got to bring up this tweet that you brought up. There you go. Yeah. "I sent this to my lab this morning." This is from a neuroscientist. This is from academia. This woman, presumably, or man, I don't know who it is, presumably grades other people's papers. And if they know their politics, I would not expect a fair review. This is from what the person wrote to their lab. "Hi all. Well, that didn't go well. General population vote. Doesn't matter. That didn't go well. Between the snow and an election result that is, to say the least, incredibly disheartening. Please feel free to take a day or two if you need time. I want to say that even though America is terrible and, at least at this moment, doesn't value us or our identities, you are all great people, and I appreciate you all, except those who voted for Trump, for your uniqueness that makes our lab a remarkable group, and we are better people and scientists for it. I am happy that all of you are part of the lab, and I will do everything I can to support our group and you each individually for whatever comes down the line. I will be in today and tomorrow. I am WFH, what does that mean? Working from home on Friday and available for regular meetings. We can complain bitterly and cry together for those who are scheduled today. I don't know if this person's in America or Canada. They talk as though statistically 50% of their lab wouldn't be Trump supporters, which means that there is some ideological purge that this person is banking on in academia.
Well, there isn't, by the way. So I don't know either if they're in Canada or the US, but it isn't 50-50, right? Because as I provide endless evidence in the parasitic mind of studies that have looked at the political affiliation of professors and academia, I mean, across all disciplines, it can vary from 5-1 to 11-1, which is certainly unbelievably lopsided. But in activist disciplines, in anthropology and in sociology and in ethnic studies and in communications and so on, it could be 130-0. In other words, you're more likely to run into a unicorn or a horse with wings. I mean, literally, than you are to run across a Republican professor in communications or almost in psychology. So is that a good thing? I mean, does it make, I explain to people, look, there are certain issues in academia that are true irrespective of your political orientation. So for example, tectonic plate dynamics are true or not, whether you're Republican or Democrat. The theory of evolution has been verified in endless ways, and it doesn't matter whether you're Republican or Democrat. On the other hand, if I'm teaching about the ethics and morality of the death penalty, there are very compelling arguments that could be made by both sides of that issue, right? And so I would certainly stand to benefit if I'm able to hear those that may not share my views on whatever fiscal policy that we're discussing, or foreign policy, or death penalty, and so on and so forth. So in some disciplines, you genuinely are murdering and raping the pursuit of truth if you presume that there is only one right position to take. And so we are cheating our students and their intellectual development, as this neuroscientist is doing, by presuming that anybody who's in her lab surely must be of the same political opinion. It's grotesque.
There was another beautiful one, Gad. I'm not sure if you saw this. When you say like what they think of Americans, let me just make sure this is well, she's a Democrat strategist, so that's fair enough that she'll be an idiot. White men without college degrees are going to ruin this country.
Yes. I mean, think of Elon Musk, total uneducated guy who's never done anything in his life, who's the biggest supporter of Trump. Gad Saad has, a very, very long list of the diplomas and degrees and all sorts of titles. Again, just an uneducated white guy, although I'm Lebanese, so I'm a Jew of color. So
JOC, I've never.
You like that, huh? You've got Bill Ackman, another guy who's never done anything. Douglas Murray. Here's another uneducated white guy. The Somali woman, Ayan Hirsi Ali, is also an uneducated white guy. So it's such an affront. As you know me enough to know this, but maybe some of your viewers and listeners don't. In chapter 1 of The Parasitic Mind, I basically state that the two fundamental ideals that drive and guide my life trajectory are truth and freedom. So, I'm perfectly happy if I do something wrong to stand up and say, hey, I'm really sorry, Viva. I know I showed up 20 minutes late and please forgive me, right? It takes humility, right? But that's what you need if you're going to function properly in society. You admit when you're wrong, you stand proudly when you think you're right, but you regulate your behavior so that you always exhibit epistemological humility. Those folks simply can never do so, right? It doesn't matter how much evidence I show you that Donald Trump's tent is the most inclusive tent that one could have ever imagined. It's still only uneducated, hick, white people who are voting for him.
Look, you're going to love this. Now, in fairness to this, I don't know if it was from 2016 or 2024, but it doesn't matter. With the imagery that you see here, look at this. I'm going to turn the volume down so I don't get copy claimed on this. This is European politicians, from what I understand, sitting there with their arms crossed. Like there has to be some human evolution thing about this particular stance that makes it repulsive. But you've got foreigners standing like scorned housewives or angry mothers looking at their kids, and that is the attitude that they have to people who voted en masse against them. And what blows my mind now, I've been breaking down some of the stats. Set aside, it's a popular vote victory. The number may come down a little bit because they're still counting California. 45% of Latinos voted for Trump. Record numbers with black men, record numbers with black women, but still 20%. And what they're basically saying, I try not to draw these hyperbolic comparisons and call them like this is what slave owners used to do back in the day, but the treatment is that of a slave owner, where it's like the minorities don't know what's good for them. They need the woman standing there with her arms crossed, telling them how to think, how to vote, and what to do. And when they deviate and when they veer too far from the plantation, then they say, you better come back because we're the ones telling you what to do. You don't get to think for yourself. But is there an evolutionary reason for why that gives you?
I mean, I don't know if I can make an intelligent comment about specifically the scornful nonverbal stance, but I think in terms of an existential stance, it basically is saying you either believe as I do, or there is something morally diseased about you. And therefore, that's why I must look at you with such scorn, right? Because I am part as Thomas Sowell. Oh, Thomas Sowell, who's another uneducated white man, right? For those of you who don't understand the satire, he's a black man, arguably one of the best intellectuals that the United States has ever had. He's an economist, but apparently he's a white, uneducated man. He certainly would not be supporting Kamala and her degenerates. But that's the reality, and certainly in academia. I mean, that kind of stance is exactly the world that I have inhabited for well over 3 decades. I'll give you a great story. I mean, people learn a lot from storytelling. I mean, I could give you all of the fancy academic stuff, but what sticks is when you back it up with actual vivid narratives. Okay. So in 2023, I was invited to be one of the plenary speakers at a one-day conference at USC, a prestigious university in Southern California. It was in celebration of, I think, the 10-year anniversary of a particular center at USC. And it was a day on, are Enlightenment values still, de rigueur? Are they still valid, and so on? So I gave a talk at that conference, and you can watch my talk on my channel, on deontological versus consequentialist ethics. And if you want, just as a small tangential parenthesis, let me just explain what that is. So deontological ethics are absolute statements of ethical positions. It is never okay to lie, would be a deontological statement. Consequentialism would be judging the moral and ethical standards of a particular action based on its consequences. So if I say, well, it's okay to lie to spare my wife's feelings if she asks me, do I look good in that dress or not? Well, then that would be consequentialist. And as I tried to explain in a very professorial manner at the talk, it's a very serious talk, no gad humor, very sober. I said, look, for many, many things, it makes perfect sense for us to put on a consequentialist hat. But for certain foundational principles, by definition, they are deontological. So if you say things like, I believe in freedom of speech, and the but is just a bunch of consequentialist calculations, then you are an imbecile who doesn't believe in freedom of speech. And I gave many examples to highlight this point, only one of which was the Trump example when he was booted out of what was then Twitter. And I said, it can't make sense that you believe in freedom of speech, but not for Donald Trump. For uniquely, there is an asterisk in this deontological principle that says Donald Trump is not afforded that deontological right. That was my only contribution to Trump in that bigger lecture that I can remember. If you saw the Q&A period after, which, by the way, even though they promised that they would send me, they decided not to send it because they realized that once I would advertise it on my large platform, it would make them look really bad. They said, oh, well, we can't send it because we didn't get signed clearance from all the audience members that the clip could be released. It was a public event. It didn't follow any secrecy laws. But anyways, people started getting up and they were unhinged in their hysteria. By the way, my wife and kids were with me in that room, and my children, who are still very young, came up to me and said, Daddy, why are people screaming like that at you? It's insane. One of them, by the way, so to our point about mass psychosis, said to me, it makes perfect sense that the government would regulate some of your speech if it is, dangerous and corrosive. Speaking specifically to me, I said, well, can you give me an example of something that I said in today's event that you would consider to be that would require the government to step in and stop? He said, well, for example, by the way, when he first began his Q&A, he had to say what his identity is. I'm a Latino. I like when they put the extra T. I'm a Latino. I'm a gay Latino man who studies sex, whatever. He said to me, when you said that men cannot bear children and that men don't menstruate, that should be regulated. So then I paused, and in my inimitable Gad style, I said, let me just repeat this to see if I understood. You think that when it comes to the issue of whether men menstruate and can bear children, I'm on the wrong side of that issue? And then you could sort of hear uncomfortable murmur. That happened not at a psychiatric ward. It happened at USC.
That's University of Southern California.
Yes, sir.
It's crazy. It's officially crazy. The thing is, though, I think it's officially crazy. Like, where the idea was that by denying a biological fact that qualifies as the requisite degree of real life violence, that it would warrant censorship online. And
exactly. And it's all of those parasitic ideas. So in the parasitic mind, I was trying to come up with a universal explanation for why each of those parasitic ideas are so catchy. Like, what is it that could make someone actually believe this nonsense? So in the same way, and let me draw an analogy, different cancers have different trajectories, but the singular thing that they have in common is unchecked cell division. So at least we can agree that that is a commonality across the different cancers. Okay, so what is common across all of these parasitic ideas? Postmodernism, cultural relativism, social constructivism, radical feminism. It's that they all start off with a noble objective. And then in the service of that noble objective, if you have to rape and murder truth in the service of that objective, so be it. So it's a consequentialist argument, right? So I am a really super empathetic and kind person. I really love trans people, and I really don't want them to ever have their feelings hurt. So in the service of that goal, well, the reality is most of us don't care that you're trans and want you to live a life that's fully dignified and void of bigotry. But in the service of that goal, I'm not going to nod my head and say, oh, yeah, men too can menstruate. Oh, yeah, men too can bear children, because I want to protect your unique personhood, right? That's what I tried to explain to the degenerates in the Canadian Senate in 2017 when I went up as an expert witness to say that there are dangers in denying reality. It starts off with a noble, empathetic reflex, but then it metamorphosizes into pure bullshit. So that's what's common across all that lunacy.
In the context of your studies, have you done any breakdown as to like what the proportion of true believers are, what the proportion of fake believers are, but who love the power that it gets them, and what the proportion of actually mentally ill individuals who are legally not able to consent among this calculation?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So I don't have the empirical evidence to answer that question, but I've often questioned it myself in terms of in the deep recesses of their minds when they go to bed at night and lay their heads on the pillow. Do they genuinely believe that? And I suspect that many of them do, because it is a way to protect their it's an ego protective mechanism that I am a truly orgiastically empathetic and kind person, which, by the way, not to engage in promotional plugging, but that's exactly the point of my next book, right? Suicidal Empathy. Because what Parasitic Mind did is it said, here is what happens when your cognitive system is parasitized, right? But we also have an emotional system, right? We are both a thinking and feeling animal. So the parasitic mind is about how parasitic ideas distort your ability to think clearly and to navigate reality clearly. And then in the follow-up with suicidal empathy, well, here's what happens once your emotional system is hijacked. And so now you have, if you like, the full story.
I'm going to play you. You saw Jimmy Kimmel's tearful statement or
Oh, I
assessment?
actually retweeted it. He was so empathetic.
Here, let me bring this up, because this is where, like, I think there's people who exploit this for ego and clout. There's others who exploit it for actual malice. Like within the online, you must admit that men can shower with girls, etc. There are those who are genuinely mentally unwell, like DSM-5, clinically diagnosable. There are other sociopaths who want to do it because they are deep misogynists and want to abuse women. And then there's others who just want to do it because it's a lever for control and influence. Watch Jimmy Kimmel, because a lot of people were observing. He's not crying out of any form of sincere empathy. He's crying because, on the one hand, maybe he doesn't feel that he has any influence anymore because nobody listened to his wise advice. Where's the audio here? Hold on a second. Qu'est-ce qui se passe ici? Did I put oh yeah, there we go. Put it down here. Listen to Jimmy Kimmel's crocodile tears.
Let's be honest. It was a terrible night last night. It was a terrible night for women, for children, for the hundreds of thousands of hardworking immigrants who make this country go.
For
climate, for science,
for science,
for journalism,
for
justice, for free speech. It was a terrible night for poor people, for the middle class, for seniors
who overwhelmingly voted for Trump.
Allies in Ukraine,
for
NATO.
Go fight, Jimmy.
The truth and democracy and decency. And it was a terrible night for everyone who voted against him. And guess what? It was a bad night for everyone who voted for him, too. You just don't realize.
Yeah, so you had a little too much to think there, middle class who voted overwhelmingly for Trump. What do you like? Do you think that they're finally losing whatever control they had over directing narratives and controlling public influence?
They are, I mean, certainly they are. But by the way, to your earlier question about which camp, let's say, would Jimmy fall in, I don't think he genuinely believes that stuff. I mean, I think it's a combination of other factors. In the deep recesses of his mind, he does know that it's full of shit. There's no conceivable way. And I think of it this way, or it's a way for him to atone for some of the public stuff that he had done in the past, the blackface, the coming from behind the woman. Remember, like he's doing as if he's mounting someone. I can't remember what it was. And so one of the ways that I can atone for all of that vulgar stuff that I did in my youthful transgression is to now demonstrate that I truly am, as Thomas Sowell said, part of the anointed ones. Go ahead.
No, that's an amazing observation, because that's the similar pattern that I've noticed with Howard Stern, with all of those who were the biggest degenerates who are now trying to buy their way into the good graces of the political elite.
It's Angela Merkel, whose I think it was the grandparents who were Nazis. What better way to demonstrate that I repudiate all of my grandparents' behaviors by now letting in, with suicidal empathy, millions of people from Muslim countries? Surely I couldn't be a racist and bigot if I open up Germany to all of those folks. By the way, your grandparents eradicated Jews from Germany by you letting in millions of people who come from cultures that are defined by their Jew hatred. Tell me how Jewish life is going to play out in Germany, dear Dr. Merkel.
Well, that was the ultimate irony for those who don't recall the Syrian refugee crisis in 2015. And Merkel basically opened up the borders of all of Europe, because there's free travel within the countries in Europe, to Syrian refugees who typically are, for whatever the reason, people might think there's good reason, hostile to Jews. And my remark at the time was, a lot of people were saying it's the making up for her Nazi history that she's overcompensating. And I made the joke, like, how the hell do you know? Like, if the one thing you want to do is get rid of the Jewry of Europe, what other means would you do it while trying to look benevolent while you do it? And then lo and behold, it was such a great exercise in assimilation and immigration policies that you had to offer money to these Syrians to go back home and the refugees to go back home. Gad, it will on that subject, and we're going to come back and forth. First of all, you don't feel bad to plug the book. The new book is called Suicidal Empathy, or that's going to be within the title. Do you have a title?
So that's the tentative title. So it's a term that I coined to explain this orgiastic emotional malady. And actually, I'll even tell you the background of how the book came to be. So I had been using, and I'd coined that term, and I've been using it on all my social media. And at one point, I wrote a long post where I demonstrated the various public policy decisions that are exemplars of suicidal empathy. And then I get an email from one of the really big publishers, the executive editor, and he basically just said, he puts my tweet and he goes, "Looks like we found your next book," or something like that. And so that's how it started. And so we first communicated last April, and I've been feverishly working on it since, because in a sense, I'm having a hard time putting an upper bound on how long the book's going to be, because every day I get sent 9,000 new cases of suicidal empathy. So at some point, I'm going to have to apply a stopping rule and say, okay, no more. The book can't be more than 43,000 pages long.
I don't remember when the first time you used it was that I heard it, but I loved it and have been using it ever since. And it's an amazing idea. The idea is, in my mind, if you have a better example, you'll let me know. That New York lady, the activist whose boyfriend gets stabbed to death on the streets at 4 a.m. in New York by a black guy who's having a mental health crisis. And she literally shows more concern for the dude who just stabbed her boyfriend to death than for her boyfriend who is lying there bleeding to death on the ground, because she wants to be understanding and sympathetic to the violent, mentally ill murderer who just killed her boyfriend. And I'm like, this is insanity. This is activism gone to the point of where you must kill me in order for me to show you how virtuous I am.
Exactly. So that is a great example. I've got a million of those in the book. I'll just give you one or two others that are well in line with the one that you just gave. In 2013, a Norwegian man was sodomized, raped by a Somali migrant. The guy was caught. He served a very minimal prison sentence, because in Norway, it's all about, doing ceramics classes. It's not nice to punish people. And then when he finished his sentence, he was going to be deported back to Somalia. The guy who was raped by him went public saying how awful he felt, because now the Somali sodomizer was going to have a much less promising future in Somalia than he would have in Norway. So, because if I am sodomized by a guy, the thing that I'm most concerned about is to ensure that he has an enriching future in the country where he sodomized me. Now, can I offer the psychological, the framework for why the suicidal empathy happens?
Oh, wait, please, let me just ask you one question about that story. Are we sure that the man was not wrongly convicted and that they were involved in an amorous relationship? Because that, and I'm not even trying to be funny. It sounds, there's no world in which one would fear that their rapist being deported to their country of origin who raped them would be treated badly after rape, and let alone that type of rape. So
we know that it is a rape, and we also know that the guy who was raped, presents himself to the world as a staunch feminist and anti-racism ally. And so no, we know exactly that he holds those beliefs. Let me offer, I want people to go out and buy the book, so don't think that by me offering you the theoretical framework, you've gotten the full cow.
You're doing the audiobook this time, correct, Gad?
Oh, it's so funny you said this. I was just going through some details of the contract. It's taken way longer for me to sign the contract. They approached me, as I said, I think it was like last April. And one of the clauses that I put, I mean, you're the lawyer, but you appreciate what happens when you're looking through a contract and I said, hey guys, the main criticism I received for my last 2 books, which is a pretty good thing if those are the only recurring criticisms you're getting, is that people were super pissed off that The Parasitic Mind and The Sad Truth About Happiness were not narrated in my own voice. Can we at least put a clause that is an option? And so I just got back to the vice manuscript and they added that in.
It should be obligatory because you have it's not that you have a good voice, you have a good voice as well, but a distinctive good voice. It's sort of like, listening to Alex Jones's book. I don't think it was someone who had a sufficiently similar voice that it wasn't shocking or glaring, but you listened to your book nobody has a voice like you. So sorry, good clause, good addition. And now what you were just about to say,
I was going to tell you about a summary of the theoretical framework of what drives suicidal empathy. So let me step back a second and offer an analogy. Take, for example, by the way, when you started, you said he's not a clinician. In a technical sense, that's true. But I'm now known, the moniker is I'm the global therapist to the world. So while I don't hold a clinical license, effectively speaking, I am the head parasitologist of the world because I'm trying to resolve a psychiatric malady at the group level. What more can you want as a clinician? But in any case, so joking aside, OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, is a condition. By the way, I've written several academic papers on various psychiatric afflictions from an evolutionary perspective. So I've done Munchausen syndrome by proxy. That's where I then developed the theory in Parasitic Mind for the malady of collective Munchausen and collective Munchausen by proxy and transgenderism, Munchausen by proxy, and so on. Anyway,
actually, let me stop you on that. That one's very important for people to appreciate, that the idea of this whole trans thing that parents impose on their children is Munchausen syndrome by proxy is when a mother who wants the attention, the social adulation, would make her kids sick, and everyone's like, "Oh, poor baby, you'll get all that social credit score and whatever because your kid is sick." And so when it's real, people feel it, and when it's not real, they get their kids sick so they can then feel it. That is, apply it mutatis mutandis to parents who say, "Oh, my 4-year-old is trans and I'm empowering his existence." And everyone's like, "Oh, good for you. Take to social media and put out videos." The transgender Munchausen syndrome by proxy is an amazing insight connection to make. Sorry, I wanted to highlight that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. If anybody who's interested in the original scientific paper that I wrote, it's in, I think, 2010 in Medical Hypotheses. It's a medical journal. So I've also written paper. I'm only saying this not to give you my CV, but because it's relevant to my OCD explanation. I've also written papers, psychiatric papers, on an evolutionary explanation of suicide, which you might imagine is a difficult concept to explain. Evolutionarily speaking, you're ending your life. And I've also written a evolutionary-based paper on sex differences in the symptomatology of OCD. In other words, men and women are likely to exhibit sex differences in terms of the O's and the C's that they succumb to. And I argue that there's an evolutionary reason for that. Okay, having said all that, so that gives you a sense of where my scientific, if you like, credentials come from to then be able to diagnose this. Okay. So OCD actually has an evolutionary explanation. And here's how it goes, and then I'll link it to suicidal empathy. The idea that we should scan the world for environmental threats makes perfect evolutionary sense. So, for example, if you and I are going out for a pizza, and I notice that your nose is running, and then you sneeze into your hand and you shake my hand, then it makes perfect evolutionary sense that I would have the reflex to say, "Hey, I'm going to go wash my hands before we have the pizza," because it makes sense for me to have that repulsion at the possibility of having germ contamination. If I go to the back door and check that it is locked before we all turn in to bed, that makes perfect evolutionary sense. The problem with OCD arises when that adaptive mechanism misfires by being hyperactive, right? So The flag usually goes up. I tend to it, the flag goes down, and then I go on with my day. But if I spend 8 hours in an infinite loop washing my hands in scalding hot water so that I don't make it to work and my skin is falling off, then that becomes a dysfunction. It's a dysregulation of an otherwise adaptive process. So having written a lot about this dysregulation, evolutionary dysregulation in my scientific work, that's how I had the insight, aha, that's what suicidal empathy is. Empathy, when it is directed at the right people and in the right amounts, makes perfect evolutionary sense, because we are a social species. We have evolved certain positive emotions that allow us to, if you like, lubricate our social bonds. It makes sense for me to have theory of mind, to put myself in your shoes when you are feeling pain. That's a good empathetic reflex for me to have. The problem arises when empathy is dysregulated. And in this case, I mean, there are several ways that it misfires, one of which is it misfires to the wrong target. So being empathetic to my Salvadorian neighbors down south because they have a right to live the American dream, so much so that it supersedes the empathy that I should have for American veterans who lost their limbs defending my right to be an asshole, doesn't make sense. That's dysregulated empathy. So what I do in the book is I take many, many public policy decisions that have resulted in the full decay of the West, and I argue that at the root of each of these public policy mistakes is suicidal empathy. God damn, that's going to be an international bestseller.
Gad, as you say it, and I don't know if this is going to be already in your thought process, but not speaking from any personal experience with OCD, that you have, I've always found like there's ways in which it manifests, and one is normal fear, like you say. Like I was biking yesterday and I forgot it was daylight savings, and so biking at 6 is a lot darker than biking at 7. And I'm on a path. I'm not worried about people now. I'm worried about gators and panthers at sunset. And then so you have the rational fear. Then you have the irrational fear applied to the rational fear, which is just an over-exaggeration, overemphasis of it. Yeah. And you have the misfiring of it being on things that are not existential threats, or the over-application of it from, like, wash your hands. But then if you also approach someone sneezing across the street as an existential threat, you're over-adapting, so to speak.
Or you're wearing a mask alone in your car in 2024.
It's so beautiful an analogy. Hold on, I was taking notes in the email. No, that was it. The overemphasis on actual threats or applying it to non-threats, and the suicidal empathy. Have you thought about this yet? At some point, and I'm not trying to be funny because I think it's almost scary. The suicidal empathy goes from suicidal empathy to homicidal empathy, that they will actually start killing you for your own good.
Well, okay, so, and we can answer that either literally or figuratively. If
let's go figuratively, then literally.
Right. Figuratively, it already happens all the time, right? I'm going to kill your career. I'm going to kill your reputation. I'm going to kill your prospects of ever being invited to the cool kids party. So the homicide has already happened. It hasn't happened, though, literally. Now, in other countries, I could literally kill you because I have the power. Oh, are you willing to accept Islam? We're giving you the choice, so you're freely able to decide no. Now, of course, because there are consequences in life, if you make the wrong choice by not accepting Islam, we're going to have to mercifully detach your head from the rest of your body. But that's done after we've given you the courtesy of choosing for yourself. So I don't think we're at the point today in the West where you can orgiastically, literally engage in the homicide that you're talking about. But boy, can we certainly do it figuratively in very painful ways.
And I don't know if you know of any historical analog. What is the threshold, like the percentage of social acceptance threshold? When did it become, when 5%, let's just go to the easy example that no one takes offense with, which is Nazi Germany. 5% of Germany is Nazis, and they say we've got these crazy ideas, and everyone's like, okay, well, too bad. And we're not buying into it. It's offensive. There's a threshold at which not only do people start to give it some sort of credibility, but also at which they start to become fearful of it, where it starts taking hold. Like what percentage roughly?
That's actually a it's even a, I mean, I'm not trying to sound patronizing, but it's even a more intelligent question than you already stating it, even though
Excellent.
exactly, that's how smart you are. That's what Laval University trained lawyers
Well,
are
no,
for.
I did my my philosophy degree was in my thesis was called deontological consequentialism.
What?
No, Again, and I'm trying to
I
find it.
knew that there was somewhat of a semblance of a brain in you. There you go.
I did 4 years of philosophy, honors degree at McGill. Then I went to Laval for my law degree, and I did 1 year exchange in Paris, which is why I did an extra year of McGill, because I wanted to get my honors degree, which required a cumulative GPA of above 3.0. But my year in Paris was pass fail, so it didn't count. So I did another year of philosophy,
Wow.
and I'm trying to track down my thesis, because when you talk about consequentialism versus Kantian categorical imperatives,
Yes.
and I sit there saying, whenever I hear someone say it's okay to kill a baby if it means saving 10, and I'm saying my reaction was always, it's never okay. What you're basically just saying is, I want to minimize the evil, because I think that the evil to be minimized is the killing. So I'm going to kill one to prevent somebody else from killing 10. And my theory has always been, you haven't minimized anything. You've actually just maximized the aggregate evil, because the other evil still exists. But no, the question is like, socially, what is this?
Yeah.
When does it become acceptable?
That in a technical way. I mean, vulgarized to the masses. By the way, a lot of people don't understand the word to vulgarize, which in French, as you know, is
Vulgariser.
Vulgariser. And the reason why it came up to my, well, first, I'm a lover of words, and I remember, I think it was my 2011 book, The Consuming Instinct. The red book here. Where is it? No, the other
hold on. Let me zoom out and then I'll see it. Oh yeah, right over your shoulder here.
Yeah, on the this, not next to the other way. This one.
Yeah, that's a water. That's a water. No, that's your microphone. I'm joking. I think it might be covered up by your mic.
Okay, it doesn't matter. It's the red one. It's called The Consuming Instinct: What Juicy Burgers, Ferraris, Pornographies, and Gift Giving Reveal About Human Nature. It was a book. It was a trade book meant to demonstrate how you could apply evolutionary psychology and evolutionary biology to study our consuming instinct.
What does a trade book mean?
Oh, that's a great question. So there are different classes of books. So let's take the one that most of your viewers and listeners would know, a textbook. A textbook is a book that's written as a pedagogic exercise to be sold to university students. So let's say you were taking a course in Philosophy 101. I'll write a textbook that hopefully professors that are teaching this course will adopt throughout Canada and North America. So that's called a textbook. An academic book, which is very different from a textbook, is a very technical book that's written for other academics and graduate students and so on. It's a scientific, so it's not meant for Philosophy 101. It's meant for practicing philosophers. Okay. Now, academic books, if they sell 1,000 copies, that would be considered a hugely successful book because they have very, very limited market. So it'll be university libraries that will purchase them, specialists in the field and so on. So my first couple of books were academic books because I was trying to lay my flag on having pioneered the field of evolutionary consumer psychology and so on. Okay. So which book is it?
I think okay. There you go.
This book right here, that's called the Evolutionary Basis of Consumption. That was my first book, and it's very, very technical. I mean, it could still be read by non-professionals, but it's a very scientific academic book. Okay, so that's the Evolutionary Basis of Consumption. Then here, I have this way. Here I've got an edited book, which I'll also explain what that is. That's called Evolutionary Psychology in the Business Sciences. It's an academic book, but it's edited in that different chapters are written by different specialists, and I serve as the editor of the entire compendium. And I usually will write an intro and an opening chapter and so on. So these two books are academic books. Okay, so they will have a much smaller distribution, even though, I mean, these were actually very successful by any standard. Okay, then the next one, this one, so to answer your question, this one was my first trade book, The Consuming Instinct. Now, what I was trying to do there, so to answer your question, what is a trade book? A trade book is meant for the masses. It's meant to be read by as many people as possible. It's what you will see at Barnes and Noble and at Indigo and so on.
Okay.
It's not for the specialists. It's not for students. It's for the general reader. And so, as you might imagine, many professors can be very successful as academic writers, but dreadfully bad as trade authors. Why? Because they don't know how to speak in a voice that would be appealing to the general masses. Okay. So now coming back to, thank you for asking that question. I think this is the first time that I've ever on a show explained the difference between different types of books. So trade,
Well, and I love the fact that you describe it as appealing to the masses, as opposed to what I suspect most would describe it as dumbing it down for the masses.
exactly. Yes. Don't talk down to people. You know, I recently had a chat with Rob Schneider, the actor, who's just a delightful human being.
He's amazing. He's amazing.
I mean, just like you want to hug this guy, okay? And I think it was maybe towards the end of the show, he said some really sweet things to me. He goes, you know, there's a lot of us in Hollywood, whatever, that are huge fans of yours. And what one always walks away when they hear you speak or read your stuff is you're never talking down to us. And that really touched me, because I think that that's one of the, if I know it's gauche to speak about oneself, but one of the things that I most appreciate about my engagement with the public is that I really take pleasure in having the corrections officer and the trucker write me a fan email, because if if my voice is resonating with him, then I'm doing something right. It's a no-brainer that the Stanford professor might write to me and say, hey, I loved your last paper on whatever. That's my job. That's what I do. But the fact that the trucker says, oh my God, I was listening to you in Viva and I decided that I'm going to go back to school because you motivated me to study psychology. Well, now I think I've done a really good thing.
Well, no, and you when you say it out loud like that, it's the exact problem with, not with academia in and of itself, but with experts in general, is people generally want to make their own decisions. So give me the info and then let me decide. Whereas most look down and say, no, I'm going to tell you what to do, and don't even ask me. When it came to, like, COVID, for example, was the prime example. We're not explaining it to you. You're not able to understand. Shut up and do what we say, versus here are the pros and cons, the risks, and you make your own decision. It's a form of control and not a form of education.
Exactly right. So coming back to the term vulgarization. So when I was communicating with my editor for The Consuming Instinct, which was going to be my first trade book, I used the term, I think it was maybe during when we were coming up with sort of the taglines for my media, whatever. I said, well, you know, the book is an attempt to vulgarize evolutionary psychology. And she said, oh, don't use the word vulgarize with the American audience. I said, why not? It's a beautiful, it's a nice. She goes, no, say popularize and so on. And that always was annoying to me, because it's exactly what the word is meant to say, which is to make something accessible to the masses. Anyways, I don't know why I said that. What was the
trade book? You were talking about your first trade book, and yeah. I think you were getting into the latest trade book. The first trade book.
So the first trade book was The Consuming Instinct. The next trade book was The Parasitic Mind. The next trade book was The Sad Truth About Happiness.
Yeah, that's what that one is, right over your shoulder there. If we can see that, right there.
And then the next one is Suicidal Empathy. Now, to our earlier point about, you know, don't tell people what to do, when you said that a minute or two ago, actually, that was one of my biggest challenges when I was working on the happiness book. And let me explain. I mean, that story in of itself is really fascinating. So when you study decision making, there are different ways that you could study psychology of decision making. You could study it from a normative perspective. Bear with me. I know it's is it okay if we get a tiny bit?
No, please go.
Yeah, okay. So normative decision making is, for example, the classical school of economics, say at University of Chicago, where many of the Nobel Prizes come from. They adhere to a view of decision making that's called Homo economicus. Homo economicus is this ultra rational being that adheres to axioms of rational choice. Example, if I prefer car A to car B and I prefer car B to car C, it must be that I prefer car A to car C. It's an axiom. It's called the transitivity axiom. It's transitive. If A is bigger than B and B is bigger than C, then A must be greater than C. So they take those axioms of rational choice and they say that anyone who violates those is behaving irrationally. Now, that's called normative decision making, because you're saying that you have to adhere to a norm of rationality. Holy shit, I'm doing a full academic lecture here. I should be charging all the assholes watching.
I'm writing down questions.
Exactly. Yeah, and to everybody who's watching, yes, this will be on the final exam. Okay? All right, let's go on. So that's normative decision making. Descriptive decision making is studying decision making to solve optimization problems, and hence you're prescribing an optimal path of decision making. This is actually, like, I literally have thought about creating these lectures and charging people money, and one of
they're master classes. There's no reason why you shouldn't be doing it.
I know I'm such an idiot. Like,
well, there's only so much time in the day, but
that, exactly. But by the way, one of the bifurcations in the road that I'm currently facing is I am an academic through and through. It's in my DNA. But if I now have to, poll people about their gender pronouns in the morning, which of course I don't do, there's an element of academia that's becoming very, very costly to me, so that the thought has crossed my mind, is it time for me to step aside? Now, if that were to happen, then it would allow me to set up those masterclass. And you've been one of the ones who's been most strongly and feverishly telling me, sign up for this, set up paywall. You're probably the one who's most been doing that. And to my great shame, because I'm a moron, I still haven't done a lot of that.
Well,
stuff.
I mean, not to say it hasn't gotten bad enough for you in Canada. Well, I don't want to besmirch where you work, because I don't want to get you into trouble through association, but not to say it hasn't gotten bad enough, because I think it's gotten way worse than anybody even knows as to how bad it is, where you can't safely go on the campus where you teach, and you have to teach remotely, and you have to worry about security. I think it's gotten bad enough where you see the writing on the wall, but it takes some time to
exactly. And that's one of the reasons why it was a godsend, frankly, that I got this position at Northwood University. They're very much into freedom of inquiry, freedom of speech, free enterprise, economic freedom. And so their president reached out to me and said, look, we're big fans of yours. We're ready to make you a permanent offer. I was a bit tentative about that, only because at the time I was in California with my family for 5 weeks. So I wasn't ready to, change my life without at least trying it. So we agreed to do a 1-year leave. My university was kind enough to grant me the 1-year leave, and so at least for the next,
look, I'll say what I think. They want you out, and if they can get you out without a fight, hey, Gad, go take a vacation. Yeah, you can come back to your job.
As I said kindly, I also had a little smirk, because I realized that, boy, why is Gad Saad being so diplomatic? But yes, there you go. That's my.
If anybody doesn't appreciate the dynamic, Gad takes a lot of flack for his writings and statements on Islam. He teaches at Concordia University, which has been historically one of the most radical universities back when I was in 2000. Like they were protesting
Netanyahu. 1,000 times worse now.
Yeah, I can only imagine. Hold on, this dog's got to get out of here. Get out. Go. Get out. Oh. Yeah. Speaking of evolutionary biology, Gad, how many paralyzed dogs would have survived in the nature? I look at that dog every day. It's like, my goodness. Oh, if only you struggle.
By the way, there is, though, an evolutionary explanation for why we are so bonded to our pets, and I actually discuss it briefly in The Consuming Instinct, in the red book that I showed.
I have a theory. Like, they're wonderful. They keep us, company. And if things get really bad, you can kill them and eat them. So it's bada bing, bada boom. I'm joking, everybody. Yeah. As you mentioned something, the A is greater than B, or sorry, B is greater than A. C is greater than B.
B is greater than C. Therefore, A is greater than C.
That works on an objective level. Like, that's logic 101. I said everybody should always take a philosophy 101 logic, because they teach you that. And then I realized, as you say it, it doesn't apply to things that are subjective. Like, I like Billy Madison is better than Happy Gilmore. Dumb and Dumber is better than Billy Madison, but I don't necessarily like Dumb and Dumber more than Happy Gilmore.
Okay, well, you just described a Nobel Prize winning studies. So let me start. So hold on. So I just described normative decision making, and I was on my way to describing prescriptive. But let's pause prescriptive for a second so I can answer what you just said. So my doctoral training, my official PhD is in psychology of decision making. Specifically, my doctoral dissertation was on looking at the following problem. When is it that we have acquired enough information about competing alternatives for us to stop acquiring additional information and make a choice? So, for example, if I'm choosing between two cars, I could look up 50 attributes on the two cars, but most of us don't do that. Instead, we look at enough information that at some point my brain says, I've now seen enough to buy car A. So what I was trying to do in my doctoral dissertation is study the stopping decisions of information search, which could then be applied to anything. So when people write to me and say, oh, but you study marketing, there's almost never a mention of the word marketing in my doctoral dissertation. It just so happened that I can then apply it to consumer behavior, hence marketing. But the fundamental doctorate, the fundamental problem that I was studying applies to mate choice. It applies to employee selection. It applies to, should I stay in a marriage or leave the marriage? So it applies to any process that involves the iterative acquisition of information. And when do I stop? Are you with me? Holy shit, this is a good conversation. And you know what?
Speaking of killing the dog, now the dog wants to come back in the room. Hold on.
All right.
Please, now leave the door open. From an evolutionary perspective, I'm probably the stupid one for just not leaving the door open at a given point in time. I'm leaving the door open now, people. I know my wife and kid are not here, so I'll have some quiet. Okay.
All right.
Sorry.
So let's go on. So my doctoral work was in the area of behavioral decision making. And the gurus of that field are two, Jews. They're Jews. Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman, two Israeli psychologists who then, moved to North America. They were lifelong friends and colleagues. And what they did, to your point about I prefer Gilmore, but whatever violation you said, the first paper that Tversky published in 1969 was with my doctoral supervisor, Jay Russo, who did his PhD in psychology, in cognitive psychology at University of Michigan. Now, Tversky and Kahneman demonstrated that many of the axioms of rational choice that classical economists tell us we should adhere to, we don't. And so they won the Nobel Prize in economics for demonstrating that economists are full of shit. Okay.
And now, that idea being they've already made up their mind as to what they want to get, and so they will fit into the preferences, the way to get there.
No, it's that the economist has a very restrained axiomatic view of how human cognition should operate. It should be hyper computational, hyper rational, but human minds don't work that way. They don't adhere to this orgiastic form of hyper-rationality. So what Kahneman and Tversky did is go through all of those axioms of rationality and demonstrate that we violate them all the time. And so they designed many astoundingly clever experiments to show, to your Gilmore story, that we don't do all the things that these economists tell us in La La Land that we should be doing. Okay. Now, I say they won the Nobel Prize. That's technically incorrect because Kahneman won it for work that he did with Tversky. Tversky didn't win it because he had unfortunately passed away, and you can't win it posthumously. So officially, it's only Kahneman who won it, but it's really Kahneman and Tversky. Okay. Now, so that's the normative decision making. Okay. Prescriptive decision making, as I mentioned earlier, is prescribing how you ought to optimize something. And I know that sounds like fancy. Well, give me a concrete example. Take, for example, a classic problem known as the traveling salesman problem. You have a salesman who has to visit 10 cities. He's going to start in city A. He has to return to city A, and he has to visit each city once. In what order should the path be as to minimize the cost of travel? Mm-hmm. That turns out to be an easy problem if you've only got 3 cities. You could manually try all 3 and then calculate which is the optimal one. When I give you 13 cities, you're going to be spending until the next 4 billion years to calculate all the permutations and combinations. So the field, the mathematics field that solves those problems algorithmically is called operations research. And so in one of my, I have two masters. In my first master's, I did a mini thesis in operations research, which is this optimization field. Now, why is it called prescriptive decision making? Because you're trying to prescribe some optimal behavior. If you wish to reduce the travel costs, this is the order in which you should visit those cities. Are you with me?
Yep.
So first approach to decision making, normative. Second approach, prescriptive. Third approach, descriptive. Descriptive simply says, describe how people actually make decisions. I'm not trying to find some normative way of behaving. I'm not trying to prescribe some optimal way of behaving. When you decide you want to buy a car, let's study the cognitive processes by which you arrive at choosing the car or marrying that girl or voting for Trump or Kamala and so on. And so for much of my career as a psychologist, as a behavioral scientist, I existed in descriptive world. I'm trying to develop theories that describe actual decision-making behavior. Okay. Why am I talking about all this? Because I'm going to link it back now to the challenge that I had when I was writing the happiness book. Now, when you're writing a happiness book, by definition, this is going to involve some prescription. Here is what you ought to do to lead a happy life. And I had always been very epistemologically suspicious of the people who stand as gurus and lecture to the rest of us what to do. And being the very, very careful professor and scientist that I am, I wanted to make sure to tell my readers that I am not offering you the incontrovertible recipe for happiness. Rather, spoken like a real academic, life is a game of managing statistical probabilities. I'm going to give you some prescriptions, which, if you apply them, increase the probability of you summiting Mount Happiness. So look at the difference between how carefully I just positioned that book to how, to your point, everybody who was much smarter than you told you, shut up. You don't walk your dog after 8 o'clock because that's settled science. Shut up, pleb. So those were exactly who the fascists were. And it turns out that they weren't part of the Republicans. Many of them are super progressive professors, leftist professors.
The correlation between progressivism and fascism or tyranny, or at least, I don't know what the proper word is for it, but like Karenism, like progressivism and Karenism, people who just tell you what to do and shame you when you disagree with them. I find it's almost a direct overlay. It's a one circle Venn diagram. Progressives and Karenists who.
But by the way, that I have a student who regrettably has disappeared. Often what happens when you have MSc students who are doing theses with you or PhD students, it's the first time in their lives where they're now tasked with creating knowledge rather than just absorbing knowledge from a classroom. And so oftentimes, regrettably, even though students might be very bright, they get sucked into a black hole and they never resurface from. And so I've had very, very bright students who wanted to work with me under my tutelage that never ended up finishing their degrees. And I'm not the one who will call you every day, say, what are you doing today? I mean, you're an adult. You also have to have the, personal agency to get your work done. In any case, that one particular student, I had proposed the following thesis topic to him, and he was very keen to do it. It very much related to your working hypothesis, which is, for example, can we identify morphological signatures of people's political orientations? So this is not quite Karenism, although it is in a sense, because there is a morphological exemplar of the woman that looks like a Karen. You follow what I'm saying?
Oh yeah, I'm just trademarking Karenism right now here. Boom. Karenism is trademarked, peeps. I'm joking.
Actually, it is the first time that I've heard it used with the ism part. So
Because it sounds like communism, but it's Karenism.
it's Karenism, exactly. So, anyways, I hope that particular student resurfaces, because we had already started to collect the data, and it's very, very powerful data, because it's taking a lot of the elements that I discuss in the parasitic mind, and is testing some really cool empirical hypotheses. So hopefully, if that student is watching, call me. I don't know where you've disappeared to, but it's time to come home. But why was I mentioning that?
It was about the decision-making process.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So so I think I finished that story. So all I was saying is that the challenge for me when writing Happiness Book was that I was now entering into a world that I heretofore had not entered, which was prescriptive world, right? All of my other work is, let me explain to you the evolutionary reasons for why we do X, Y, Z. I'm describing behavior under some parsimonious theoretical framework. Happiness was a completely different endeavor. Yes, I'm going to use ancient wisdoms. I'm going to use contemporary science. I'm going to use my personal life trajectory to offer you some prescriptions of how to live a happy life. But at first, I was very hesitant to do so, because I thought, I don't want anybody to think that it is an assured guarantee recipe.
Well, it's I don't know, I can analogize it to golf, where a professional might never get a hole in one, but the better you swing, the more likely it is you get your ball within a certain vicinity. You don't cheat on your wife. You might still get divorced, but cheat on your wife and you are increasing the odds of getting divorced and murdered, and not necessarily in that order. So now so I mean, I don't want to get to the punchline of what suicidal empathy is going to be. Actually, I kind of want to know how it ends. Where do you see? I mean, America's a good litmus test for the world right now. I think it might have gone singularly crazy, but then I sort of look to Europe, and Europe has gone crazy as well in terms of a same type of Karenism, in terms of speech, in terms of government overreach. There's a bit of a pushback, but whether or not the government's gotten already too far along to be pushed back, where do you see things going? And then I actually want to talk a bit about Canada while we're here.
Sure. I mean, right now I'm not feeling great. I'm certainly feeling better than I did Tuesday morning, right? Because at least by Trump winning, you are going to have some autocorrective mechanisms that will swing things in the right direction. But I keep warning people. I've already done, since Tuesday, several shows, and I keep repeating the following point, which I'm happy to repeat here. Don't now be complacent, sit back and say the problem is solved, Trump is here, because Trump will come in and Trump will leave. And someone else might come along who is also a Trump guy, JD Vance. But if you don't eradicate the parasitic ideas and the suicidal empathy that has taken 50 to 100 years to flourish and proliferate, then it's just, in French, you say partie remise, right? It'll come back even maybe stronger than ever before, right? Remember, when you take an antibiotic, if you don't kill all of the bacteria, the ones that remain, it's a form of evolutionary selection, will be even, that's how you develop the evolution of the superbug. So if you don't eradicate this nonsense, it'll come back even more orgiastically nasty in some future iteration. So yes, celebrate that Trump won, but don't sit back on your couch and eat potato chips all day. There's still a lot of work to be done.
That analogy, actually, of like why the doctors say take the antibiotics even if you feel better, because if you don't, it comes back stronger and more resistant to antibiotics. That's an amazing idea, but the superbug to the parasitic mind.
It's called, in mind, I'm giving you a lot of stuff from suicidal empathy.
It's genius, Gad, but you know that already. My personal dilemma is, Trump won and everybody can celebrate, but I don't think that I'm done yet mocking into oblivion everyone and publicly shaming those who were the most arrogant, pompous pricks on earth, the Michael Cohens of the world, the Cardi B's of the world, the ones who thought they could browbeat people into submission, because they need to be mocked and humiliated and basically not disavowed, but shun into irrelevance. I had on a guy named Richard Barris yesterday, who's the best pollster out there. And, I said, like, with Trump's victory, is it unique to Trump or is it sort of party-wide? It was a stupid question as I started asking. And he's like, no, it's Trump. It's the character. It's the person that people love. And Trumpism, which could be, when Trump comes and goes in 4 years, it could be someone else who has to fill in that Trumpism. Whether or not it's JD Vance, we'll find out as things evolve. But it's true. Like if Trump comes and goes and it's a flash in the pan, then it's a big victory, but short-lived. So
100%. And if I can draw an analogy, I was recently approached by someone. I won't give the details, so I don't give them away. Who said, and this has happened to me many times in the past, where someone says, I'm such a fan, and all kinds of compliments, and then there's a but. So I'm waiting for the but. But do you not think that when you do the pink wig, it affects your, legitimacy as a professor? Or when you hide under, and I look at them, I say, you exactly don't get it. I mean, it couldn't be any clearer that you need to consume more of my content. It is precisely because of the unique set of skills that I have that I'm able to be this effective. I just spent quite a bit of time being about as professorial as you can get, right? So no one is going to outrank me on professorial status. That doesn't remove the fact that I can act like a buffoon in the service of trying to persuade you, precisely because I have enough authenticity and self-confidence to know that it doesn't diminish me by putting on the wig. It's precisely because I am 18 feet tall, metaphorically speaking, that I can wear the wig. Now, to draw an analogy with Trump, it's the exact same thing. If he were more stately, a la Romney, and if he were more kind, a la pick your other presidential guy, his voice would have never resonated. You need him to be exactly who he has to show up in the garbage truck for it to work and for him to win on Tuesday.
It's Gad, we're lit. You don't even know this, but our thoughts must have been the same at a given point in time. Like just recently, because I have the discussion with my father, who said he follows me on Twitter, and he's like, "David, do you have to swear so much?" I was like, "Dad, first of all, there's an element of not getting attention, but getting people to focus on something, and you could be polite as you want and have a great message, and A, no one's going to hear it, and good for having a good message that no one hears, and B, you'll still get demonized. You could never wear the pink wig. You could never do the satire. You'll still get derision because of what you say. So strategically, there's no reason not to. And on the other hand, it is the level of honesty where, I was thinking, Trump's in power. If I ever got the call, Viva, would you be the press secretary? And for a second, I'm thinking, my tweets are too much of a liability. And then I'm thinking like, no, my tweets are an indication that you'll get respect. But if you pull a Jim Acosta, I will berate you and tell you to stop being an idiot and sit down and give the mic up to the next real journalist. You've justified all of my bad conduct, Gad. I hope you should feel proud of yourself.
Listen, authenticity is the whole ball game, right? I mean, I actually in the happiness book, I have a whole section on authenticity. Now there are two layers of authenticity. There's personal authenticity. Is Trump authentic? Is Gad Saad? Is Viva authentic? But there's also existential authenticity, meaning, so in this, I was talking about this in the context of living your life so that hopefully at the end of your life, you have as few regrets as possible. And there I was arguing, if you live a life of existential authenticity, then you are protecting yourself against that. And by the way, and I'm not saying this just because I'm on your show, you perfectly exemplify that which I tell people to do, which is you did become a lawyer, and I think you were the editor of the Law Review. So it's not like, so you had all of the credentials and all the things, and you went to a top law firm, and then you looked at one point in the proverbial mirror and you said, that's not what I want to do. And very few people are going to say, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go to philosophy degree at McGill. I'm going to do law school. I'm going to become the Law Review guy. I'm going to go to a law firm. And then I'm going to drop all that so I can do balloons with ice. What is that thing you did? I think
the Impimba effect. Amazing.
Right. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm sure your parents came very close to disowning the good Jewish boy. But guess what? Who won at the end? By you living an authentic life, an existential authentic life, I'm sure you've been able to flourish in ways that you could have never imagined had you continued. So don't become a pediatrician because your dad and your mom are pediatricians and they expect that of you, because you will wake up at 60 and say, I always wanted to be an architect, and now my life is gone and it's too late. So authentic. And by the way, the ancient Greeks and the Delphic maxim of know thyself, it's just 2 words, know thyself, has stood the test of time because it is universal and since time immemorial.
Amazing. Again, so what is your, if I may ask, the situation with Northwood University?
Yes. So thank you so much for asking. So Northwood reached out to me. By the way, the president of, I don't know what it is. Not their entire, but quite a few of their senior staff are Canadians. So the president, so Northwood University is a university in Midland, Michigan. Midland is, I'd never heard of it. It is gorgeous. Now, there is a reason why it's so gorgeous. It's because this is where the headquarters, the global headquarters of Dow Chemicals is in Midland. And so they've poured in billions of dollars to this town, precisely because if you're going to bring a top chemist from Zurich to, rural Michigan, you need to have culture. You need to have a sushi place, and you need to have cafes. So when I first went there, my inaugural visit earlier this semester, and my wife came with me. I was concerned, like, is it going to be like, crystal meth labs everywhere? And it is gorgeous, beautiful downtown, cafes and restaurants, and cool. It's beautiful. The campus is beautiful. Northwood University is, interestingly, it follows the European model of les grandes écoles. Les grandes écoles these are the schools that are focused on only one thing. So, for example, Sciences Po for the future political leaders. All the business schools are usually separate schools. They're just business schools. So Northwood University is really a big, gigantic business school that's completely rooted in all of the freedom ethos that you could think of. So the president reached out to me in the summer when I had put out of office for 5 weeks. I'm not answering anybody. And he knew of some of my difficulties at Concordia. They were all big fans of my work. And luckily, I violated my edict to not check my emails. And so I had this long email from this guy that I'd never heard of, who had been the president of San Francis Xavier in Canada. And he reached out. He said, hey, can we talk? We'd love to have you join our family. And since then, it has been one of the most, it's not like I'm being paid to say this, right? I mean, I wouldn't have said it. I'm very authentic. He's a gem. If all academic presidents were like Kent McDonald, there would be no problem in academia. Okay. His whole team is unbelievable. They've given me complete freedom to do things as I please. I'm teaching 2 courses in spring. But otherwise, so that my title is visiting professor and global ambassador. The global ambassador part is to promote the school, right? Is to use my platform. Look, there are 4,000 universities in the United States. So a classic marketing problem is, how do you differentiate yourself? How do you break out of the clutter? And so hopefully I could contribute to, breaking them out of the clutter. And I think so far it's been very, very fruitful. A lot of people have gotten to know Northwood via my intervention. So I've got nothing but unbelievable things to say about that place.
It's amazing. And the best marketing on earth is to have someone who people trust, love, who is what they call woke or based, anti-woke and based, or whatever the words are, people, who.
I get it.
It's a university that would bring on a Gad Saad and not suppress a Gad Saad. Is a university where I, as a parent, would want to send my kids without a question, and I've got nothing to do with the university. So it's fantastic. Gad, do you have another 15 minutes?
Let's do it.
Okay.
It's impossible to be satiated of you, man.
No, I do. And I got questions I don't want to neglect. So everyone on YouTube, come over to Rumble, and I'm going to get to some questions and local stuff in a second. I'm just going to end it on YouTube. It changes nothing from our end, but it's the Q&A after party.